the amount of things that we don't do because we're scared to be rejected. We're scared to fail. We're scared. And, I think the school system really misses the ball here a lot of times, because to me, it's the literal training of failure bad, failure bad, failure bad.
Yes.
So you get indoctrinated with that. Then you know what happens when you come out? Then you start to say, I don't even want to try because I don't want to fail.
Welcome to the Carey podcast. We are your hosts, Tia Carey and Donovan Carey.
Yo.
And we are just so thankful that you guys are joining us today. Today, we actually will be discussing chapter 4 of Genesis about the Cain and Abel story. Last week, just to kind of give a little recap, we did go over chapter 3, which was about Adam and Eve and the big fall. So we had a little heated debate about that. So if you have not had a chance.
She lost.
Okay. From what he said. So anyways, if you haven't had a chance to watch that video, please go ahead and give it a watch after this one.
So don't forget, we also cover in chapter 5, which is the lineage of Seth for the most part.
Yes, I'm sorry. So it'll be chapter 4 and chapter 5 today.
All right, so maybe before we get started, I'll give a quick recap of chapter 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So like TR said, this is pretty much the Cain and Abel story. Everybody's heard it. Maybe not everyone's read it.
I didn't. I actually didn't.
Yeah, I don't think I have either, to be honest. But, one of the things that we all know about the Cain and Abel story is that it's kind of rooted in like jealousy, right? And so essentially, Adam and Eve, they start to have children. They have Cain first and then Abel. And then, Cain gets jealous of Abel, right? And then he kills him.
Yes.
Which was very, very, you kind of in the beginning of the Bible here.
Yeah.
And we already have our first murder.
So
after Cain kills Abel, then it kind of gets into the lineage of Cain.
Yeah.
And then we get into chapter 5, where Adam and Eve have Seth, which is a third child that we know of anyway. And then it gets into the lineage of Seth.
Yes.
And that takes us down to Noah.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't gotten a chance to read chapter 4 and 5, we highly encourage you, go ahead and read it.
Yes.
So we're not going to read through it, but what we're going to do is just kind of pull out some of the important parts that we saw in our studies. Yeah. And, just to kind of give a good idea of just some of the lessons that we pulled.
Yes.
So I'm going to throw it to you really quickly.
Yeah.
So we just started the story. And first thing is, Adam knows Eve.
Yes. It was a polite way of saying that they had intercourse.
Yep.
So they did conceive. So I'm sorry. So just to kind of backtrack a little bit, the last thing we know of was God did kick out Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. So at this point, they are outside of the Garden of Eden, probably nearby or somewhere. But they're close to God for sure. But they conceived and had Cain first and then Abel, which I do believe were twins. Reason being, because they only mention the fact that she conceived once. When, if you look in the beginning,
I'm looking at it now. You already know.
She conceived only one time before she had Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
And then the next time they mention that she conceives is towards the end, where she has Seth.
Yeah. So in verse 1, I see it says that she conceived, but in verse 2, it says, and she again bare his brother Abel.
Yes. So I believe that they were twins, which is interesting. I want to point out their name, which I feel like is very important because it tells the nature of their character. So for instance, Eve. So when she had Cain, she named him Cain because, which scholars do believe that she was thinking that this baby was who God was speaking about in the last chapter when he was referring to
Pain.
her offspring, right?
Oh,
that was
the
going to
seed
be
of the. Okay.
Yes, her seed, who was going to be the one who crushed the head of the serpent, right?
Yeah.
So she's like, the Lord has helped me acquire this son. So she names him Cain, which means either acquire or possess, to possess of something. So, which is very important when we discuss him a little bit later. And then she has Abel, which Abel name means to be empty of something.
I didn't go as deep as you did with the names and the conceived, and I think that's very interesting stuff. Yeah. I went straight to their jobs, right? And the reason I went to their jobs is I don't know why when I'm reading, a lot of times I try to draw the parallels, right? And so when I'm drawing the parallels, first thing I see is Abel was a keeper of sheep, right? He's a shepherd.
Yes.
And the shepherd is talked about so much in the Bible. I mean, the shepherd, you're looking at God, right? David
Lord
refers to him.
Shepherd.
Yep, the Lord is my shepherd. You have David, who was a shepherd. Yes. You have Jesus, who's known as the chief shepherd.
Yes.
Right. The role of shepherd is such a big one, right? And I think that's interesting. But also, when I look at Cain, he was a tiller of the ground, which is a fancy way of saying farmer. Right?
Yeah.
And I instantly went to the curse from chapter 3.
Yes.
So, like in chapter 3, the curse on Adam was pretty much that the ground, you won't have dominion over it anymore. It's gonna fight you, tooth and nail.
Yes,
and I'm like,
sweat for it.
You're gonna have to sweat, literally. Yes. And I'm like, of course, I'm reading this through the lens of I already know Cain was jealous of Abel. He kills him. Yes. So I'm like, okay, so from the beginning, Cain is bearing a lot of that curse, whereas Abel, right, he may be the first shepherd that we hear about, and Abel, when you're looking at it from that standpoint, you could see, okay, I got to deal with this curse of my father, day in and day out, while you just frolicking with the sheep, herding the sheep, and of course, herding is not an easy job. Yeah, but I think that farmer dealing with the ground, dealing with the curse directly. Yes, I wonder if that has something to do with it. That was just something that really stood out to me.
Possibly, it was just something that was boiling up deep down inside, and that's usually how it go, right? But after they mention their jobs, basically, right? They go into harvest, right? Harvest season. Yep. Where they both had to present offerings to the Lord. Yeah. Right? And I thought it was so interesting, the things that they decided on offering to the Lord, right? So first they talk about Cain, where Cain offered some of his crops that I mentioned, at least in my version, which is the NLT.
Brought up the fruit of the ground is what I have in King James Version.
Yeah, for me it says some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. So whichever he was growing at that time. Yeah. But it was just some of it. And then for Abel, he brought the best of his flock, which was the firstborn of the lambs, right? Which is important, which we see God end up actually accepting Abel's offering, but he rejected Cain's offering. Yep. And then I was like, okay, well, why? Like, why did God reject Cain's but accepted Abel's? Like, was it because there was blood that was shed there? Like, like what
because it doesn't really go, it's like, it doesn't even tell you much about Cain's offering at all. It just says he brought forth what he had. Right?
Exactly.
Or what he brought.
Right. But if we look in Leviticus, and this is just me moving a little forward, it does talk about the Israelites did offer God crops as an offering. Yeah. And he accepted it. They had like a list of things that they had to do, right? In order to do it. They had to create this sweet aroma for him. But it was approved by him. It was something that he actually wanted. So I'm like, okay, so it's not the crops. Like, it's not
the
actual
the sheep means
items.
More than the crops.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not that. What made sense to me was it was the faith. That's where I feel like they differed. Because with Cain, it specifically said, at least in my version, that he gave some of his crops, right? And we know as a farmer, you have to trust in the Lord.
Oh, yeah.
Like your faith has to be on a whole nother level, right?
Yep.
Because, and we're talking about before irrigation, before
before
all of that, right?
I mean, he's literally just going out there and really, like you said, you just trusting God make it rain when it's supposed to rain,
wind, sunlight, right? All the things you need for these things to grow. Yeah. But these are things that are provided by God. So your faith in God has to be on a whole nother level, right?
Yeah.
So if you're bringing God some of your crops, what is that saying to him, right? Like, I can't really give you all. I can't really give you my best because I don't know if I ever will get that again because I only get this harvest season so often, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it just kind of showed his heart posture towards God.
Yeah.
Versus
Abel.
I'm sorry, you're right. Versus Abel, he gave the first of his flock, the firstborn, of his flock.
Yep.
Which
and the fat ones.
And the fat ones, right?
Yeah.
Which to me, you're saying, God, this is giving the best that I have. Like, you are worth more than any of this to me. Which is why I thought his name was so important, because his name is to be empty of. Yeah. And in that moment, he's like, I am empty. I need you more than any of this, right? Like, I am empty without you. I need you to fill that void for me. Yeah. You get what I'm saying?
That's an interesting way to look at it.
That's the way I saw it. And then with Cain, I feel like his name, we will understand his name a little bit later once we see his actions later. But with Abel, I feel like this is where we are able to see why he was named to be empty of. Yes. You know, if we look in the New Testament, Jesus tells us to be poor in spirit. The blessed is the poor in spirit. When you think about that, that's to be living in humility, right? Yeah. To humble ourselves, to say, like, Lord, I need you, right? To be vulnerable before the Lord.
Very challenging too.
It is. It's very challenging. Yeah. But I feel like that was that moment for Abel. Like, I need you. Mm-hmm. I'm empty without you.
Yeah, that's cool because, you know, like, you're talking faith. And I think most people, including me, like, when you read it, you go to greed, right? Mm-hmm. So I think when you start to talk faith, and, you know, once again, this is right after the fall. Mm-hmm. This is, all right, how are you posturing yourself before God?
Yes.
I think that's extremely interesting. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that I can tell you in my studies, I did not even think about, just the faith of it. I actually went back to, okay, Cain's fighting the ground here.
Yes.
He's fighting the ground. He's dealing with the curse day in and day out. Mm-hmm. He's becoming, and you know, I didn't think of the word faith, but it is still faith, where he is holding on, right? He's holding on. He said, I can't give my best fruit because I work so hard for this. I am sweating for this.
Yes.
And, you know, like you said, when you have true faith in God, you have to
doesn't matter about the circumstances.
Yeah, because you believe God He's gonna replenish.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mm-hmm. I mean, the faith portion is something that you hardly hear.
Yes.
As it relates to the Cain and Abel story.
Yes.
Okay, so then, you know, Abel gets accepted.
Right.
Cain gets rejected.
Yes.
And the first thing he does is make up his face all crazy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, because, I mean, clearly there was emotions boiling up inside of him, right?
Yeah.
And jealousy, right? Yeah. Envy, or just anger towards probably God, you know, like, why him and not me? Like, why are you favoring him, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of people feel like that, like, oh, that person is more favored than me. Why does God allow this to happen to them and I'm in this situation? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure that happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and just to be vulnerable, I've been there as well.
Haven't we all? I mean, you know, especially when when really bad things happen, or things that you really could not plan for.
Yeah.
It's like, God,
why me?
Why? And, you know, that's really, I would say that's the reason a lot of people lose faith. The reason a lot of people leave Christianity is because something has happened that is unexplained.
Yes.
And, you know, I think that's where you have to start to think. And I think, you know, the show Chosen kind of does this really well, where it's like it's the will of God.
Yeah.
And though Jesus is sitting right there.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of those guys are watching Jesus perform miracle after miracle. And then they have to deal with bear their own stuff. And they're like, Jesus, can you bring this person back from the dead?
I could barely walk.
Dude, and Jesus is like, it's not for you.
It's not it's not God's will.
It's not God's will.
Yeah.
And that is I think that's one of the hardest things to accept. You have to literally put aside humility. I mean, not humility, pride. The cost of it is literally being humble.
Yes.
It's to say, I know I don't understand this thing. I can't understand why. And though I may be questioning it, God, I have to accept your will.
Yes.
I have to accept it.
Yes.
That this is what's best for me in the long run because salvation, right?
Salvation.
So we got Cain makes up his face.
Yes.
Right.
So he's upset.
He's pissed. Upset. Yes.
He's like, why you? Why I gave you my crops.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then God asks him, like, okay, why are you angry?
Be careful with those feelings. Be careful with how you make in your face, because the devil waiting on you.
Oh, for sure.
The enemy waiting. He's a serpent. He's the slickest.
Yes.
Right? We found that out.
Yes.
So
you got your daddy. He can possibly get you too.
He could get you too.
Okay. Most likely his emotions was deeply rooted in pride, right? And we see a lot in Proverbs how God hates the proud, right?
Yeah.
He's like, listen, and we have to remember, these are people that are in the presence of the Lord.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
You can't come here with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not with that.
And I think that's very telling. Right? Because here we go again.
Yeah.
God showing us through the Bible, through the scriptures, how bad pride is.
Yeah.
Like, pride is so... And it's such a hard thing.
Yeah.
It is, because, you know, especially corporate America, these type, like, pride is what gets you far.
I know.
Like, it truly is. When you talk about even competition,
yeah,
like, that pride is what gets you going a lot of times. I'm not saying it's good, but it is what drives us.
Yeah.
As a person, if I'm in corporate America, I have to have some level of pride in my work. I have to have, you know, and God... Maybe pride's not the right word, but God definitely expects you to have some pride in what you offer, right? Some level of care in what you offer.
And I think, you know what? It just all boils down to what is rooted in.
Yeah.
Because if you're in corporate America, and if you are doing it to glorify God's name, if you're doing it to shine light on Him, right? Like, literally show, like, oh, this is what God can do if you do it the right way. I think that's different.
Yeah.
But if you over here stepping on people's heads, and you know what I'm saying?
If it become all about you.
If it's all about you.
Yeah.
If it's all about you and not about being a servant.
Well, and that's cool, because, like, when you look at Jesus, right? Jesus was probably the first one, like, the servant leader, right?
Like,
there ain't no better example. Yeah. Literally, the Last Supper, he's washing his disciples' feet.
Yes.
Let me tell you, there's a lot of people who ain't washing feet right now.
I can tell you right now, I ain't washing, nope. Unless the Lord tell me to.
You can wash these feet. You can wash them.
Anywho, so before we move on, I do want to mention one thing about his name again. So we see that God has said to Cain for him to control the sin, or the sin would control him.
Yeah.
Right? And when you think about his name, you know, means to possess, right? Yeah. And when you think of something being possessive, you think of it controlling something, right? So in that moment, I feel like God was telling him, live up to your name. You know what I'm saying? Because it could go either way.
Yeah. You could either be controlling it, or it will be controlling you.
You can possess it, or it will possess you, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting that God was pointing it out. And I feel like at this point is when we started to see the meaning of his name.
Yeah.
You know, and then it'll show a little bit more. It'll develop later in the next few verses, but...
Wow. Yeah. So then he goes from that, and clearly we know who won that battle, because he kills Abel.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And that's where everything kind of, to me, starts to open up a little bit, right? Yeah. Because now you have Cain who gets possessed
Mm-hmm.
by the enemy.
Yes.
Right? And
his premeditated murder.
Yeah. And he essentially let everything in.
I feel like, and I mentioned this in the last episode when I brought up Jesus speaking to the religious leaders, where he mentioned that he was a murderer in the beginning and he was talking about the devil. Mm-hmm. And this right here shows that Cain was possessed by the devil.
Oh, yeah.
For him to commit that murder.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's literally talking about the devil who possessed Cain.
Yes.
Because we only in chapter 4.
Yes.
And we already see, this is definitely the beginning.
Yes.
So,
yes.
All right, Cain then kills Abel. Mm-hmm. And then God rose up.
Yes.
Right?
And he's like, where's your brother? Where's your brother?
Yep.
And Cain responds and he's like, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah.
And honestly, I didn't even know that phrase came from
Me neither.
This part
yeah.
of the Bible. Because I heard it so many times, like, I am my brother's keeper.
Yeah, that's typically how you hear it. I am my brother's keeper. I've never actually known that Cain was the one who
essentially asked that question. Yeah.
Getting slick with God.
Basically, yeah, it was a slick comment, a slick, question to him. He says this, and this is another time where we see that someone did not take accountability.
Yep.
When God has questioned them. God clearly already knew the answer to this, right? Yeah. Because after that, he comes in and he says, listen, I hear your brother's cries from the ground.
I can hear the voice. My exact words are, I heard the voice of your brother's blood cry to me from the ground.
Yes.
And I read that and it really, I was like, okay, so this is what we're really mentioning, what we would consider a soul or maybe even a spirit. I use those words interchangeably, but, I think that's something interesting because we see this kind of separation of spirit and flesh.
Yes.
Right? Though Abel's flesh is dead, his spirit is still alive. It's still crying to God.
Yes.
Right? So God can hear him actively.
Yes.
And that really makes you feel blessed a little bit that we have this much information on God.
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting that we saw Adam, Eve, and now Cain, who were in the presence of God and had no idea how much God knew that he was all knowing.
Yes.
So that to me is something that, like, we know more about God today than they did, and they were able to essentially, talk to him whenever they wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, and get him to respond whenever. Like that is the interesting part to me. So that I thought that was interesting, and then I think we then go from there into the curse.
Yeah.
Right? And God then curses Cain.
Yes.
And this is a part that all right, he's already working cursed land. He already has to fight the curse of Adam.
Yep.
Essentially. And God pretty much tells him, okay, I gave you a way to feed yourself, and I'm taking that away.
Yeah.
You no longer, the ground will no longer give you anything.
Yes.
And that was his whole livelihood.
Yeah.
Essentially. Right? And one thing I found that was interesting is that here in verse 11 and 12, at least in the King James Version, God refers to the earth as her. And I don't know what to make of it. Quite frankly, I was combing through like, why? I just never seen that before.
Yeah.
I mean, we call it Mother Earth. Yes, that's like a cultural thing. But I don't know if the Mother Earth came from here or if I truly don't know. I would say, hey, if you guys know more than me about that,
let us know in the comments.
Please, just
or if you see it anywhere else in the Bible, point it out to us.
Yeah,
so we can try to
so I can make some connections here. Right. Yeah, right. So I thought that was all crazy. So that's the curse that God gave Cain. Did you have anything on the curse?
It brought me back to, like you said, the curse with Adam, where God specifically said to him that the ground is cursed because of you. And when God spoke to Cain and said, I can hear your brother's blood cry from the ground.
Yeah.
I feel like in that moment, we really truly see a connection between God telling Adam, the ground is cursed because of you.
Yeah, like
your son's blood is going to be in the ground because of you. You get what I'm saying?
It was almost like you're saying it's like a prophecy, almost like because of what you just did, you don't know it yet.
Yes.
But your son's blood will be in the ground.
Yes.
In the same ground.
In that moment, Adam didn't experience anything. Like, you know, like they get this curse, they get kicked out. Okay. And then now we have a murder of your son.
Yeah.
By your other son.
And remember, a part of that curse to Adam was from the dust you came, to the dust you shall return.
Yes.
Adam's still not dead.
And this is the first death.
And actually, I don't think we ever hear that Adam was buried or anything, but we do know that Abel was in the ground.
Yes.
I don't know why, but as you were talking about the curse, it brought me back to from the dust you came, to the dust you shall return.
Yes.
Okay, so anything you got left on the curse, or you want to get into Cain's response? Because that I think this was.
I feel like only thing I was gonna say is the fact that God was very lenient with him. He was still very merciful, in my opinion, because you killed someone. If God wanted to, he could have just took him out if he wanted to, right? But he was like, I'm gonna strip you of everything because you are not deserving of that anymore. Okay, you don't even realize what you had, and because you were ungrateful, and because you completely ignored the warnings, completely went with the devil, you know what I'm saying? You're in that kingdom now. All right, you're no longer in my kingdom. There had to be some repercussions there, right? But I feel like in reality, he didn't get what he really truly deserved.
So I wonder how much of that is just because of how we see murder. Because remember, no murder had taken place.
Yeah.
So, in our society, in our culture, murder is a huge thing, right? But I don't know if God sees murder any different than a lie, right?
No, yeah,
right.
True.
So, like, if we look at it from that perspective, I think the biggest reason he was cursed is that when he had the opportunity to repent, when he had the opportunity, he did not even do that. And
that's a good point.
I think that was probably a part of that's a part of the lesson, right? Because God sees everything.
Yeah.
So instead of repenting when God gave him the chance to, because really
he lied.
Yeah. Why else would God even ask? The only reason I could think that God would ask is to say, "I'm going to give you one opportunity here. Are you going to repent?" I wonder if he repents, does he still get this curse?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's the murder. It seems to me to be the lack of repentance. And I only say that because if it was the murder, then I believe he would have walked in and cursed him, but he didn't. Yeah. He gave him the chance to say something. So that was, I mean.
I think he gave him the chance, but I still feel like he was being merciful as well. I mean,
I definitely. Yeah. So I didn't even get to my thoughts on the actual curse itself. I just was saying, because I agree with you, he was being merciful. I think that stands with either way. Yeah. But I'm saying for him to ask, though he already knew. Yeah. To me is, it's like it's like when your parents ask, they gotta call home from school. They ask you the question, you like, what she know? Yeah. Yeah. To me, is that. He already knows. So I'm giving you the chance. Are you gonna lie to me? And so the first two cases they didn't lie, but like you said,
they didn't take accountability.
They didn't repent.
Right.
And here we go again. And to me, that seems to be the common denominator, the cycle, not the sin itself. Yeah. It's the lack of repentance, which would say, you're not righteous, right? Because you don't even feel bad for it. If you felt bad for it, you would be honest about it. So then we get to the actual, his response, Cain's response, right? And I thought that was very telling.
Yeah, he's like, my punishment is too much to bear. You done took everything from me, and this is just my version here. I'm just kind of like summarizing it a little bit, the Carey version. But he's like, this is too much for me to bear. Like, you took everything from me. Now I'm homeless. Like, you banishing me from the land, out of your presence. Like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
And now I have to worry about somebody killing me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, you just killed your brother, and you're worried about somebody murdering you?
Yeah. I found that interesting too, because as far as we know, he the only murderer.
Yeah.
So we looking at, I'm like, I think there's something there that's pretty much saying how his mind completely changed. Now the way he thinks is almost insane.
Yeah.
Right? Because
if I'm capable of this,
exactly. If I'm capable of this, somebody else can do it, right? And we do find out that like Adam and Eve was having other children.
Yes.
So for people who are wondering who else would kill them, it would be some of the other children. They're not named, not all of them. I think only one more is named.
Yeah.
But there are other children that Adam and Eve are having. So I think he's saying, well, I did something against. Yeah, one of them gonna kill me as in retaliation for Abel.
Possibly.
But he's the only one who's done the murdering so far.
Yeah.
So he's almost birthed this idea or this thing. And I think this is another thing. He has shown everybody that you can murder.
Yeah.
Right? So think about it from that perspective. Like, nobody probably even knew you can murder before that.
Yeah.
Right? Because man was just kind of created. So, all right, they bit the fruit, which even though it was a sin to bite the fruit, it wasn't like biting a fruit is a sin.
Right.
So now we're looking at murder. Wait, I could take someone else's life?
Yeah.
That to me, and we see the repercussions of that later on.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting, just the way he started to think. He started to come from a place of paranoia. Right? Because if I could do it, somebody else could do it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. But then God's response, I thought, was also equally as interesting. Where God then says, okay.
No.
Yeah, he put a mark on his face to hide him, essentially.
Yeah, to protect him.
To protect him.
Anyone that tries to kill him will get a 7-fold punishment.
Yeah.
Which I was like, okay, and again, just shows how merciful he is. And also shows how he is a God of justice. You know what I'm saying? Like okay, I don't care. Listen. Yeah. Just because this person did that don't mean you would do it too.
Yeah. And that's a recurring theme in the Bible, right? Yeah. Because, Jesus literally tells us we need to forgive. Like it's all about forgiving. So if somebody tries to kill him, that's showing that they have not forgiven him. And that God don't put up with that. Right. Right.
You know what? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. But you know what also? The marking of the head stood out to me because, we read Revelation, right? And, do you remember about the seal?
Yeah.
How I think it's 144,000 people that would get the seal during the plagues and all.
Yeah, when everything starts to happen.
Everything start kicking off, if it haven't already. But these are the people that are protected by God. And then it also reminded me of the time in Egypt when the Israelites were still in Egypt at that time and they put the blood over their door and that protected them from the spirit of death.
Yeah.
When you think about it, right? And I'm just like, we see this constantly where God is literally marking his people.
Yeah. No, this is mine. You can't touch it.
Yeah. From the enemy.
And I think that goes to show how much the enemy fears God. Because if God marks somebody, the enemy, I'm not gonna even mess with him.
You better keep going.
Yeah. All right. You know what? I'm gonna go try the person that literally in Egypt, the person next door.
Yeah.
If I mess with that one, I'm gonna bring the wrath of God.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because I did think about the marking. Yeah. I didn't correlate it with Egypt. Though. I did correlate it with Revelation, but not Egypt.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Yes, that stood out to me. Which also, how like we anoint our heads.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's in the same, like, is that like us? Because I know we do it, but I never really
symbolic.
Is it symbolic of like
of the anointing? Hey, we're God's, right? We belong to God.
We belong to God. We're God's children here. Yeah. We have the marking of God. You know?
I think we'll get once we kind of because I think they talk about that. And sometimes Moses period. I think it's when they
Okay.
start to talk about the anointing oil.
Okay.
So I think we should reach that, and we'll see kind of
Yeah.
what the, I know we do
The
it.
significance
We probably
of
should know
why.
more about it, but
Yeah, we just kind of do it because we kind of were taught to do it. But I
Yeah.
would love to get a real revelation of why we are doing that today.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. All right. So God marks Cain,
Mhm.
right? And one thing that just it stood out to me was, why would God protect Cain?
Yeah.
It did not make any sense to me. And
Mhm.
that was one of those things, just like we talked about earlier. I read the rest and I'm like, it had to be God's will.
God's will.
This is God's will. Remember, the job of Adam and Eve is to multiply.
Yes.
Multiply. And you could say that's the job of the human race at this time specifically.
Yeah.
I need you to be fruitful and multiply.
Mhm.
So though Cain has done something horribly wrong,
Mhm.
he still has a job here.
Yeah.
But I think what also comes is we start to see his lineage, right? And with Cain's lineage, we start to see them start to become, in a worldly sense, these great people.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
like I'm looking, so first thing, Cain says, hey, I thought this was interesting too, because Cain becomes very resourceful.
Yeah.
Right? Cain is like, all right, well, I can't plow the ground anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start to build cities.
Yes.
Right? And that's like the first thing he does is he has a child and then he builds a city.
Yeah.
And that was like,
it says founded in mine.
He founded a city?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see.
In 17, it said, then Cain founded a city, which he named Enoch, after his son.
No, see, in King James it said he built.
Wow.
Yeah, so it said he built a city, and you start to see this like worldly success, right? And so you got a J-Ball,
Yes.
right? And he was the one who was the father of those who dwelled in tents.
Yes.
And then his brother name was Jubal, and he was the one who was the father of the harp and the organ.
Yes.
Right? And then you have, and we're not saying all the names, but Tubal Cain is next, right? And he's the artificer of brass and iron, right? Iron, I'm pretty sure, is what weapons were made out of back then, right? That's why they say iron sharpens iron, right?
Yes.
And then we get to Lamech, right? Who decides one wife ain't enough. I need two.
Yes.
Right? And then...
Well, hold on. Before we move on, I wanted to ask you about the polygamy.
Yeah.
Do you think that was something God wanted?
No. Do I think it was what God wanted? No.
If it was his like original plan.
I don't think so. Because if it was, I think he would have created two women instead of one.
Ooh.
Right. So
yes.
God, when he said it's not good, he gave him one woman.
Yes.
Not two. And what I find even more interesting about that is literally he told him be fruitful and multiply. So if it would only make sense to give you two women if I wanted that. Because now you can multiply twice as fast.
Yes.
Right? So no, I don't think that's what God wanted. I think this is actually showing Cain's line start to divert from God. So I think that's why they wanted to show he has two wives.
Yeah.
So to me, it's shown, because right after it tells us he has two wives, now it tells us that he's killed somebody.
Yes.
So Lamech was a piece of work.
But clearly, before we get there, and I agree with you with that, I know that there's a good amount of people that look at the Bible and they see, these great men who have multiple wives and concubines, and they're like, if they can do it, it gotta be God ordained, right? And one thing, and we said this before, but one thing about the Bible, it's gonna show the good and the bad. It's gonna show the ins and the outs. Like it shows it all, but it doesn't mean that God approves.
It's like slavery.
Everything, just like the slavery, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that God is like, yes, do that. Because one thing we will notice, and we'll definitely get there, because we see David, right? You got David, Solomon, and Abraham. Like, these are important people, that God loved, right? But if we look deeply in their story, and I'm really excited to get to their stories, a lot of their multiple, like them having the multiple wives, it led to
issues,
heartbreaks, and family discord, and just disasters, right? Death even, right? Like so much has happened from that if you don't really pay attention to it, you'll miss it.
Yeah.
You'll miss it. And that's what made me feel like, no. That was not God ordained.
No, I truly agree with you on that, because we got to be very careful when we're reading the Bible and understand. I know I heard one guy say that was kind of one of the ways that they knew that the Bible, like when they were doing the research of what books to put in, because they said a lot of these guys, you're seeing their flaws.
Yeah.
Very rarely when you're writing about a great person do you talk about their flaws.
Yes.
You know, I think that that's what the Bible really is.
Yeah.
It's for us in our time, it's for us to gather the lessons from. Right? Really the reason for this podcast.
Learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, learn from their mistakes. Take what's good. Yeah, take what's good and not what's bad. Right. And so, you know, you have Lamech here. And I don't think it's by coincidence that right after they tell us about his 2 wives, they tell us he killed somebody.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
I got 2 wives and I killed somebody.
Yes.
And then the gall on Lamech to be like, hey, if Cain could be avenged 7-fold,
yes,
I'm going to be avenged 77-fold.
And I'm like, when I read that, I was like, who are you?
But to me, that's exactly what it's showing. Yeah. It's showing, I don't even care what God's saying anymore. Yes. This is my word.
Like, did you forget that Cain literally said this to God?
Yeah.
And God is the one that said that?
Yeah.
And then here you come behind us and you're going to be the one that speak it instead of actually going before the Lord?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And like, God, can you put that marking on me too? Or something. You know what I'm saying? No, he's like, no, I'm going to take things into my own hand, which is what he did. Someone attacked him and he decided to retaliate and kill him. And we're just taking his word here. We don't know if he got attacked for real or not. You know, he could have just killed a man for all we know.
Yeah. And one of the things I thought was interesting was that number 77. Because in Matthew 18:22, I remember Jesus talking about forgiveness 77 times. And it hit me right before we did the podcast. I had to look it up. I was like, wait, as I was like reviewing my notes, I'm like, wait, didn't Jesus say the number 77?
Yeah.
And I looked it up real quick. And literally Matthew 18:22, Jesus talking about forgiving 77 times. Wow. So to me, that's a direct correlation. It's almost like a direct answer to Lamech, right? Lamech says, and God will avenge me 77 times. Yes. And Jesus saying, you need to forgive 77 times. That was something I found interesting.
It's crazy that you correlated it, that portion, to Jesus, because the portion that I started thinking about him was dealing with the marriage. And I'm going to go back to that because I feel like Jesus actually came back and reiterated what God wanted for marriage, where he says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. The two are united into one. Since there are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. So that's the other time where we hear them talking about marriage and how it should be two with one.
You want to hear something funny?
What?
We don't even have to go that far. If you go to chapter 5, and I'm jumping a little ahead, but we're almost there.
Okay.
If you look at verse 2, right? It says, it's talking about God when he created Adam and Eve. It says, male and female created he them.
Yes.
And blessed them and called their name Adam.
Wow.
God never separates Adam from Eve.
Yeah.
God literally always refers to them as Adam together.
Yeah.
I just thought that was, piggybacking off of what you said, clearly God didn't intend for it to be, it's supposed to be one flesh.
Yes.
You're together. And that's why that second wife is probably not what God intends.
Yes. So moving forward, in verse 25, now we're introduced to Seth. So Adam and Eve conceives again. Yep. And they have Seth. And she's like excited. Like, you know, the Lord has blessed me with another baby that has replaced Abel. You know, she has lost a son at this point. she lost 2, technically, right? Because the other one just got kicked out, you know, and is now a wanderer, homeless guy somewhere.
Well, he ain't homeless because he built a city.
Oh, this is true. Well, he was homeless at one point. Yeah. But so now God has blessed her with Seth, which his name means appointed or to set or place firm. And I thought it was interesting that was his name, because we know moving forward in chapter 5, this is the beginning of the lineage that eventually leads to Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, he was the replacement.
Yes.
It seems for Adam. Mm-hmm. And now, not Adam, sorry, Abel.
Yes.
And now we get this different lineage. Now,
yes,
one of the things that stood out to me immediately, and I really also don't know what to think of this, is why did they tell us how long everybody lived? So they told us how long it was before they had a child.
Yeah.
And then how long it was that they lived entirely.
And they lived a long time, okay?
Well, I thought about why. I did think about why they lived so long. And I noticed in general, it's not from generation to generation, but in general, they're living less and less time. I don't know if you're reading it. So, like, they're starting off in the 900s. By the time you get to Noah, I think it was like 500 or something. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because they would remember.
I don't know when exactly he died. I know he was 500 years old when he had children.
Okay, so we could go one generation up from Noah, though.
Yes, his was less. Lamech,
another
right? Lamech,
another one. Yeah.
Yes,
and he was
700
in the 700s, right? Yes. So what I'm noticing and what I found interesting is, I think it's because God wanted them to multiply, so they had to live for a very long time, so you can have more and more and more children, right?
We will have to make that determination later once we meet more people to see how long they lived. But if we had to compare from then to today,
I mean, well, we know today.
Okay,
we know
that I can
a combination of food,
but
and
and that part too, right? Food, pollution, a little bit of everything, the water, all types of things.
Less
going on.
God.
It's just further away, right?
But so all right. Well, we're talking Seth here, his lineage.
Yes.
And did you take from it that Seth, that was a direct reference back to the seed?
No, actually.
No, because of the Mary thing.
Because I still think that Mary is the seed, her seed that he was referring to. And then his seed, I already explained, that's the offsprings of the devil, the devil's children. Which, again, I'm sorry, but back to Cain, I just think it's so funny that Eve really thought that was the seed that God was referring to, like he was going to be the redeemer, the deliverer, which we know now is Jesus, right? But he ended up actually being the seed of the enemy when you think about it. I mean, Jesus described them in that verse when he was talking to the religious leaders.
He did.
Was he not? So just when you think about it, I thought it was crazy that he ended up being the complete opposite of what she thought he was going to be.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So as far as Seth's line,
yes,
did you find anything of interest there?
Yes. So Enoch.
Okay. What did you find interesting about Enoch?
It was interesting because he never dies.
Yeah.
He spent 300 years in close fellowship with God.
Can you read your version of it? I would love to hear.
Yes. So from what I have, it said, after the birth of Methuselah, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, Methuselah.
Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years, and he had sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day he disappeared because God took him. So
I only know of 2 people who did not die, who God took directly. That would have been Enoch
and Elijah.
Yes. Right. One of the things I thought was very interesting, and this is a little bit outside of
what's in there, right? Yeah.
But Enoch, and they kind of explain why it's not in our Bible, but Enoch actually has books of the Bible, right? Now, I think when I heard someone explaining it, they could not actually trace it back to Enoch, which is why they didn't put it in our Bible.
Yes.
But I believe it's in like the Ethiopian.
I heard that too.
The Ethiopian Jewish Bible. And apparently it reads almost like science fiction, where like it's a lot of stuff happening before the flood, which we'll get into next with all the craziness happening. But one thing I found very interesting, right, before I was able to just like, all right, whatever, it's not in our Bible. In Jude of our Bible, it actually quotes the book of Enoch. Right, so it quotes, because I think he wrote 2 books. So I think it's the first Enoch.
Yeah,
and it's in Jude verses 14 through 15.
Yes,
and that I found very interesting because we accepted Jude.
Yes,
we accepted that book.
Yes,
and it refers to this book of Enoch.
Yes,
which I do want to read, but after I finish the Bible.
Yes,
but I think that was just so interesting that Jude is New Testament, but he clearly believed that the book of Enoch was gospel. Well, I can't really use the word gospel because Jesus hadn't come, but that it was the word. It was a part of the word.
Yeah, because he referred to him as a prophet.
Yeah.
He said that he was prophesying the coming of the Lord.
Yeah. See, and
so he was prophesying about Jesus.
And we wouldn't even know because we don't have it.
Yeah.
We don't have it, but it's something I do want to read because, and I think you can find it easily on the internet, but it's something I want to read after I finish the Bible.
Yeah.
From what I understand, it reads very, very different. But I just thought that was something interesting to point out. But I think it also points out, I mean, how many people really just didn't die. Like, he was living so well. He was walking so much with God.
Yeah.
That God just was like, all right, I'm going to spare you death.
Yeah.
And that to me is something that I think is also like.
So he didn't even get affected by the curse.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah. So him nor Elijah, right? I just find that interesting with Enoch and that thinking, especially because I think 2 generations later we get Noah.
Yes. But before we move forward to Noah, I really wanted to ask you this question because I was wondering, like, what does it mean to live in close fellowship with God? Like, what?
To walk with God.
Like, to walk with God. Well,
here it says walk with
yes,
God.
And it says that as well. It said walking in close fellowship with God or lived in close fellowship with God. Because that was 2 different verses. One was in verse 22 and the other was verse 23. But I was just very, very curious of, like, what does that mean? Like, why? What was so special about Enoch, right? And in Hebrew 11:5, it actually explains a little bit about what that means. And he said, by faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death. And it was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. And in verse 6 it says, but without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Which reminds me of Abel, because Abel is the one that had faith, which is why he pleased God, versus Cain, who was without faith.
Wow.
It was impossible for him to please God, which is why he was rejected.
Mic drop.
Yes.
That's a great full circle.
Yes.
That truly is a great full circle.
Yes.
So I guess I'm thinking walk by faith, not by sight.
Yes.
Right? And you'll put where that is in the Bible, hopefully.
Yes.
But
we're called to walk by faith and not by sight, which is 2 Corinthians 5:7.
There we go. 2 Corinthians 5:7.
Yes.
And I thought that was interesting because in chapter 4, it tells us all of these great things that Cain's lineage did.
Yeah.
Although they're getting further away from God, they're the father of this and the father of that, right? And then you're looking at Seth's lineage, who we really don't get anything from outside of Enoch, right? And then Noah. If you're looking at Cain's lineage, that's walking by sight.
Yes.
Right? You're looking at them and saying, but they seem to have done so well.
Yes.
But they're getting further and further from God. Whereas Seth's lineage, right? They seem to be very humble. They seem to be very meek, right?
Yes.
Back to that, to that word meek that Jesus talks about, the meek shall inherit the earth.
Yes.
Right? But they're the ones, right?
Yes.
Enoch is the one who doesn't even have to suffer death, right? Noah is the one who as we would get into,
was saved.
He literally was saved.
I mean, even if we go back to chapter 4, verse 26, it says, when Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. At that time, people first began to worship the Lord by name.
Yeah.
And I truly do believe Seth's line was really appointed, right? Because of the closeness that they had with the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even though it does specify with Enoch, he was in close fellowship with the Lord. I do feel like when you look at Abraham and all of, I think that's in Seth's lines, right?
Well, it would have to be because everybody else is gone.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
When we look at, like, these are people that were true worshipers of the Lord.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I can see that, you know, I can see that being like down Abel's category versus Cain lineage. We see a bit of a difference there.
You mean
right?
Seth's category?
Abel.
Okay.
Abel, I mean,
what he would have had.
What he would have been if he was still alive. But we just saw an example with Abel of how pleasing he was to God.
Yeah, I see.
And we see later that Seth, even Eve said it, right?
Like
to replace Abel. And then we see his lineage and the closeness that they
becomes, had. Yeah. Which I also think is funny, going back to the original point of them, Abel and Cain being twins.
Yeah.
Because it would almost be a telltale of two different lines.
Yeah.
You know, we used to always say that with twins, you have one bad twin, one good one.
Yeah.
We would always say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you literally would be looking at that if they are twins, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you make a good point for it, right? She only conceived once, according to at least mine and your Bible.
Yeah.
All right, next we get into Noah.
Yes.
And Noah is supposed to be the one.
The one.
Right? From his birth, right? They said in verse 29, chapter 5, this same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because the ground which the Lord hath cursed. Mm-hmm. Right? So in other words, and yours probably read it better, but in other words, Noah should be the savior.
Yeah.
That Adam curse.
Yeah.
They expected Noah to be the one to lift it.
Yeah, it says, may he bring us relief.
Way easier to understand.
Yeah.
And then we find out Noah has 3 children, Shemhan and Japheth. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into them in the next one.
In the next one, yes. So that's pretty much a wrap of chapter 5, 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Yes. Which was really good to me. It was so many gems and had so many lessons.
Yeah.
That I was able to pull from it.
Yeah. What's the biggest one?
The biggest one is truly the importance of worship to the Lord. More than anything, for me, it just shows why He essentially created us.
Yeah.
You know, we were created to worship. That's why naturally we crave to worship something, right? Like whether that's, for some people, it's God. Most is God. Some others is other things like money and, you know,
I see what you're
whatever it may be. You always feel like there's something more. There's something more. And I've definitely been there where I felt like there was something more until we had a full circle together, right? When we had a come to Jesus moment. Literally. And then I realized, oh, the more is Jesus.
Yeah.
The more is Jesus. And I felt that crave, be satisfied.
Yeah.
When I came back into
the
kingdom of God. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah. So best lesson to me is the importance of keeping control of those ill feelings, those ill thoughts.
Yes.
Because
that rejection,
God warned Cain. Yeah, He warned Cain, right? Hey, either you control it or it'll control you.
Yes.
And we see what happens because of it, right?
Right.
That to me was the biggest takeaway here. But you know, I love the point that you made about faith. I think that you know, that's another huge one that I'll walk away from and just you know, like, okay, am I truly living in faith?
Yeah.
You know, because it gets hard, right? It gets hard when you're sitting up there, you got to pay bills. You got, adulting is not easy. And, sometimes we know that God doesn't want us to do things, but we say, all right, I need to lie in this interview, right? Because I need to make this money.
Yeah.
Are we walking by faith in that point? You know what I'm saying? Like, do we have faith that if we didn't lie in this interview, God will still provide for us?
Yes.
I use that because I feel like that's the most relatable example, right? We all done the little lie.
Yeah, a little exaggeration. Exaggerating is a lie.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
Ultimately.
It is. So I just those were two of the gems. I know I was supposed to give one, but here
those are good ones. Those are really good ones, and I pulled those as well.
Yeah.
Like you said, those emotions, that rejection. The rejection is a big one.
Yeah.
It's a big one because it's one of those things that can stem from childhood.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people have dealt with either being rejected by a parent or a teacher or bullies.
We've all dealt with some level of rejection.
Some level of rejection. But a lot of times it stems from childhood.
Yeah. Well, the fear of it stems from childhood.
Yes.
Yeah, because we all deal with rejection, just, I would say, just in regular life.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No. You're fine. But when you think about it, and the reason why I said a lot of times it stems from childhood, because the way our brain works, and I know I spoke to you before about the RAS system in our brain. Do you remember me talking to you about that?
Yeah.
Where basically our brain, like once it have like this idea of something or a thought, it will constantly search for more truth about it, right? So if in your brain, if you have been rejected about something, right? Like let's say your dad leaves, right? And you feel rejected from your father, or your mother leaves, you're rejected by your mother, or whatever the case may be. Well, as you grow older and as time goes on, your brain is going to constantly be searching for people that are rejecting you.
Yeah.
And it could be something so minor, right?
Oh,
but your brain is constantly like, okay, like, how are they rejecting me? Versus focusing on the people that are accepting you.
Yeah.
Or the fact that God has accepted you. And that rejection, that spirit of rejection is so dangerous. It's so dangerous because it can lead to so many other things if unchecked. Yes.
As God warned.
As God has warned. Yes. So I definitely wanted to point that one out, because that is something that stood out to me when it came to Cain. And it just reminded me, because we have all dealt with that. Yeah,
that rejection, like you said, is so common too, right?
Yeah.
It's
a sneaky one, because if you don't realize it, it'll just...
Yeah. I mean, that's where you start to talk about the depression and the anxiety, the amount of things that we don't do because we're scared to be rejected. We're scared to fail. We're scared. And, I think the school system really misses the ball here a lot of times, because to me, it's the literal training of failure bad. Failure bad.
Yeah.
Failure bad.
Yes.
So you get indoctrinated with that. Then you know what happens when you come out? Then you start to say, I don't even want to try because I don't want to fail.
Yeah.
And I know everybody has done that at some level. Whether it's with, college or with just your career or, it's like, I'd rather not try because if I fail, you may not say that. I
don't want that feeling.
Yeah. A lot of it is, I don't want to put in the work and fail.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because it comes with embarrassment. It comes with, so, there's a lot of that I'm sure even Cain was feeling in that, right? Well, you accepted his, you didn't accept mine.
Yeah.
Right? There's an embarrassment to that. So I think you make a really good point about that rejection and how it can affect us and why we have to be very, very careful of it. Yeah.
Yes.
So did you have anything else you wanted to touch on here?
So that's all I have. What about you?
I'm good.
All right. Well, we want to thank you guys for joining us again for another episode. This was a really good conversation.
Oh, yeah.
If there's something that you would like to add, please let us know in the comments. we love to learn. We love to grow together.
Oh, yeah.
We're all in this journey together. So definitely drop some gems in the comments if you have any. And I just want to discuss what we will be talking about next time.
Yeah.
Which will be the story of Noah.
Yep. Chapters 6 through 9.
Yes.
So we got quite a heavy load to discuss.
Yes.
But we'll try to get through it in some level
We'll try
of a timely fashion.
Yes.
So, if you like this content, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe.
Yes. Share.
Yes, definitely share. And so we thank y'all for another week. We'll see you next Sunday.